London Heathrow, Amsterdam Schiphol, and Singapore Changi. Every single one of them spends over $1 billion a year just to keep the airport running. But who's actually paying for all of it? Is it you, the airlines, or is someone else quietly funding the entire system? Let's start with the obvious answer, the planes. Every aircraft that lands pays a landing fee, and the bigger the plane, the more it pays, because the fee is based on weight. So over at Atlanta, the busiest airport on Earth, a Southwest 737 pays somewhere around $200 to land. An Airbus A380, the biggest passenger plane in the world, pays way more because it weighs way more. But even then, we're talking maybe $1,300. For an airplane carrying hundreds of people across an ocean, that's surprisingly little. Now the strange part. Atlanta doesn't just make up those prices. Under its deal with the airlines, the airport adds up what it costs to run the airfield, the runways, the taxiways, all of it, and then spreads that cost across all the planes expected to land that year based on weight. Whatever that math works out to, that becomes the landing fee. So the runway was never really built to make money. It's built to pay for itself and basically break even. The airport isn't sitting there charging whatever it can get away with. The whole thing is denied to just cover its own costs. So the planes basically pay their own way, and that's it. Except there's one part of this business that plays by a completely different set of rules. Run by a company that isn't even American, doesn't answer to the FAA, and quietly owns a piece of airports you've probably walked through yourself. We'll come back to that. But first, if the plane is only covering its own costs, then who's actually paying to run the place? You mostly, just not through your ticket. Once you're past security, the airport controls something your ticket never did, your time, and everywhere you're allowed to spend it. Parking, shops, restaurants, that side of the business now brings in close to 40% of all airport revenue, up from about 30% a few decades ago. And nobody's capping what a bottle of water costs back there. There's no formula for it the way there is for the runway outside. Now that's the part everybody already kind of suspects. What they don't think about is that none of it works unless people actually show up. And that water bottle, you're not even really buying it from the airport. See, the airport leases that shop out to some operator, charges them rent, and then takes a cut of everything they sell on top of it, sometimes up to 15%. So that markup you're paying at the register, it's quietly covering the airport's cut of the lease, baked right into the price before you ever pick the thing up off the shelf. Everything so far happens while you're awake. A huge share of what an airport earns happens while you're asleep. Back in 2009, Branson, Missouri built its own commercial airport, a $155 million terminal built to handle over 1 million passengers a year. The idea being it could grab even a small slice of the 8 million tourists already coming to Branson by car and bus every summer. Last year, that airport served a little over 5,000 passengers total. It's still, technically, the only privately owned commercial airport left in America. And these days it gets by mostly on private charters, because the airlines it was built for stopped showing up years ago. Now that's just one airport failing at this, but the same problem shows up across the whole industry. According to McKinsey, airports worldwide lost around $4 billion in 2024. And that's what passenger traffic all the way back to where it was before the pandemic. Full planes, full terminals, and they're still losing money. Put those two things side by side and the whole picture kind of flips. The parking fees, the retail cut, the $9 water, turns out that's not some airport being greedy for the fun of it. For most airports out there, that's the thin little margin keeping them from turning into the next Branson. So if running this business is this brutal, who would even want to run more than one of them at a time? Somebody does, just not who you'd think. Take London Gatwick, the UK's second busiest airport. It's not run by Britain. It belongs to a French company called Vinci. And Vinci doesn't stop at Gatwick. They've got 10 airports across Portugal, a piece of one of Osaka's main airports over in Japan, airports scattered from Brazil to Costa Rica to a little field in central Florida. Over 70 airports in 14 countries. One company most travelers couldn't name if you put them on the spot. And Vinci isn't even the biggest one doing this. By the industry's own count, the single largest airport operator on the planet is actually Spanish, a company called AENA, which runs 46 airports back home, plus stakes reaching all the way from Brazil to one of London's own airports. And it's not just who operates these airports. Even the ownership goes places that honestly should raise an eyebrow. Look at Heathrow itself, the front door to Britain, a vital national asset in the words of its own chairman. Today, its biggest shareholders are a French investment firm, Qatar's sovereign wealth fund with a 20% slice, and Saudi Arabia's holding 15%. One of the most important airports in the Western world, and the people who own it mostly answer to Paris, Doha, and Riyadh. And this is the part I think actually deserves a second look. Those Gulf funds aren't just quiet investors parking their money. They're arms of governments that own their own giant airlines. Qatar Airways, the Saudi carriers, airlines whose entire strategy is to pull the world's air traffic through Doha and Riyadh instead of London. So you end up with a genuinely strange situation. Some of the people who'd benefit if Heathrow stayed cramped, capped, and expensive are the same people who own a piece of it. Maybe that's fine. Maybe it's just money, but it's the kind of thing worth noticing before we all shrug and call it international investment. So that's who's quietly collecting the rent. Now remember, at a place like Heathrow, that landing fee is basically locked to cost recovery. The airport can't just crank up the price on a slot because everybody wants it. So then, who decided a single landing slot at Heathrow was worth $75 million? So think about the math for a second. Heathrow runs at 98% capacity on just 2 runways, after decades of being blocked from expanding. So when a landing slot opens up, there's no room to just add a new one. The airlines end up buying each other's. Oman Air paid Kenya Airways $75 million for one single slot. Not the plane, not the route, just the legal right to land at one specific hour on one specific day. And Qatar Airways paid over $20 million for another one just last year. These slots have gotten so valuable that airlines actually borrow against them now. Back in 2015, Virgin Atlantic put up its own Heathrow slots as collateral for a loan worth close to $280 million, pledged to a bank the same way you'd pledge your house. There's even a carrier that reportedly kept flying nearly empty planes into Heathrow for years just so it wouldn't lose a slot. Because the rule is, if you use a slot less than 80% of the time, you forfeit it. And burning a few $1,000s in jet fuel on an empty flight? That's nothing next to losing a $75 million asset overnight. And just think about how strange that is for a second. Heathrow isn't the one selling anything here. That $75 million never even touches the airport. It goes straight to Kenya Airways, the airline giving up the slot. The airport's legally stuck charging its little formula fee for that landing. Meanwhile, the airlines went and built their own multi-million-dollar market for it right on top. The value was never in the runway itself, it's in getting access to it. Most major US airports, Atlanta included, pay for runways and terminal expansions by selling municipal bonds, the same tool a city uses to fund a school. Investors lend the money up front, and the airport pays it back over decades using landing fees, parking, retail, exactly the revenue this whole video's been tracing. So when passenger numbers collapse, a recession, a pandemic, an airline pulling out, that debt doesn't disappear with them. During the pandemic, US airports lost tens of billions in revenue almost overnight, and a huge share of the gap got covered by emergency federal funding, because the alternative was airports defaulting on debt owed to people who never once bought a ticket. And those bond agreements usually say that revenue has to cover the debt payments before it goes anywhere else, before maintenance, before anything. So money from a source that has nothing to do with any actual flight ends up protected ahead of almost everybody. And then there's a second arrangement underneath all that, honestly the strangest one yet. Most people figure the airport wants you spending more in the terminal because the airport pockets the money. At Atlanta, though, that's not really how it works. When that shopping and dining revenue grows, roughly half of the growth gets handed back to the airlines by contract, specifically to lower what they pay to land there. It's called the residual rate model, and it's running at more than a few major US hubs, not just in Atlanta. So that $9 you spend on a bottle of water, it doesn't even stay with the airport. Part of it goes toward what your airline owes to land there in the first place. So really, you're quietly subsidizing your own flight. The airport was never really designed to make money off the plane. The landing fee was only ever meant to cover the airport's own costs, to break even, and nothing more. Everything you've seen since walking through security exists because of that one restriction. The shopping mall behind the gates, the parking garage, the warehouses full of FedEx packages moving in the dead of night, the $75 million landing slot that never even touches the airport's accounts. For most major airports, all of that is the real business now, the part that actually keeps the lights on, precisely because the plane was never allowed to be.